What's up, guys? This is Kephas.
Welcome to SBA Spotlight. In these videos, I'll be covering how well the single button assistant performs for each spec, what it does well, where it falls short, and how to get the most out of it, especially if you're looking for a lower stress or more accessible way to play. So whether you're here to relax, overcome a limitation, or just see how far one button can take you, I've got you covered. Alright, so let's talk about the single button assistant and how it's working out for marksmanship hunters. And I've got good news, because if you want to use the single button assistant, marksmanship hunter is probably one of the best classes that you can run with. This is probably one of the best versions of the single button assistant that I've seen, and according to Wowhead, it's estimating about a 15% loss to optimal DPS potential, and that's incredibly good. 85% of your optimal when using the single button assistant is fantastic. So this is definitely one of the better ones out there. It's basically neck and neck with Beast Mastery, which was also performing really well with this tool. So if you don't want to fool around with a pet, then marksmanship might be the way to go. Now, this might be one of the easiest classes that I've covered so far, because to put it simply, the single button assistant will cover pretty much every single ability in your rotation aside from your main offensive cooldown, Trueshot, which we'll talk about here in just a moment. It'll even use optional talents like Explosive Shot and Volley, which is a ground targeting ability. The single button assistant seems to follow a fairly simplified version of your rotation, but the good thing about marksmanship hunters is that most of your talents and rotation revolve around abilities that either reset or empower other abilities. So it basically doesn't have a whole lot of nuance to get lost in, and that might explain why using the assisted highlight only loses you about 7% of your optimal DPS potential, which is very good, which means that most of your DPS loss probably comes from the global cooldown penalty. Now, I did notice that I was sitting at focus cap a little bit more often, but I mean, it seems to be doing a pretty good job at keeping cooldowns on cooldown, using arcane shot with precise shots, and using steady shot whenever there's nothing else to do. I noticed that as a Dark Ranger, it was doing a really good job at keeping up with Black Arrow and keeping it on cooldown, but then I switched over to Sentinel and it was basically using kill shot the same way, treating it like a high priority, so I don't know if that's always ideal, but it's definitely something to take note of. One thing that surprised me was how well it seems to do in multi-target situations. This might be one of those rare cases where it might perform better for marksmanship hunters when you're fighting multiple targets, because it seems to do an incredibly good job at weaving in multi-shot. So it seems to do a pretty decent job at keeping trick shots up, and I can see those numbers flying, which is very satisfying to watch. Now, it will use volley in both single target and AoE situations, which is good, and it also treats it as a high priority. The only downside to this is that it's not able to anticipate whenever there's a big AoE pool. It's simply going to use volley whenever it's available. So there are certain situations where you're not getting as much out of volley as you could because you're not saving it for a big pool, or you'll sometimes use it at the very end of a fight, which can be kind of annoying. Now, again, the only ability that the single button assistant won't use for you is Trueshot, which is your main offensive cooldown ability, and this gives you a little bit more control over when to activate that burst window. The good news here is that you do have a couple of options, because if you want to have more control over your offensive cooldown, then you can simply use it on a separate button, keep track of it, and use it whenever you want to activate that burst window. This is a great option if you always want to make sure that you're getting the most out of it. But if you're someone that doesn't care about optimizing it and you really don't want to think about having to use it, the good news is that it's an ability that is off the global cooldown, which means that you can macro it in with the SBA. I've gone ahead and created the macro and added it to the description. What it will do is it will use the single button assistant and it will keep Trueshot on cooldown. It will also use any trinkets that you have because they are also off the global cooldown. You can also add in any racials that you have like Blood Fury because those are also off the global cooldown, but you're going to want to add those in yourself. You simply copy this into a macro in-game, add it to your action bar, and you'll be good to go. Now, something that I've done with this macro and something you might want to consider doing even if you don't want to use any of these cooldowns is adding a no channeling conditional to the single button assistant. This is to prevent the single button assistant from interrupting rapid fire, which is a channel ability. Without it, if you activate rapid fire and you keep spamming the single button assistant, it will interrupt the ability. So it's definitely something that you should consider. Overall, I'm very satisfied with how well the single button assistant works with marksmanship hunters. It seems to be keeping up with damage pretty well with a relatively small loss compared to a lot of other classes. Obviously, there's still plenty of room for higher damage, so if you're wanting to get more out of your marksmanship hunter, then you definitely don't want to use the single button assistant, but you're certainly not punished as much for using it as you are with many of the other classes. On top of that, it's incredibly user-friendly managing your entire DPS rotation with the exception of one ability which can be macroed in. So when it comes to the single button assistant, marksmanship hunters rank high on both usability and performance, and to me, that makes it one of the best versions of the SBA out there. And that's pretty much everything I've learned for now, but as always, I'd love to hear from you. What do you think of the single button assistant and how is it working out for you so far? Let me know in the comments. But with all that being said, I will see you guys on the next one.
Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, let me know by clicking that like button. And feel free to share it with your friends so they can enjoy it as well. And if you'd like to see more videos, you can subscribe to the channel and click on the bell icon to be notified as soon as new videos are posted. You can also follow me on Facebook, and if you'd like, you can support my work on Patreon. Links to all that stuff can be found in the description below. This is Kephas. Until next time.